Unsere Sims benutzen ein super intelligentes KI-System, um virtuelle Menschen zu erschaffen, die für uns auf sehr glaubwürdige Art und Weise denken, fühlen und interagieren. Aber wie funktioniert dieses System? Wir klappen heute den Sims-Kopf auf und gucken mal da rein. Denn wir schauen uns an The Genius AI Behind the Sims.
The Sims is a digital dollhouse filled with little computer people, and it's your job to keep them alive, keep them happy, and keep their house furnished with ever more expensive trinkets. But micromanaging the needs and desires of an entire family can get pretty tedious, so the developers at Maxis soon realized that they'd need to give these guys a certain amount of autonomy, free will, the power to think for themselves if the player stops giving direct commands.
Das stimmt.
Which is actually a pretty complicated task. These characters need to read as believable humans, and they need to be able to adapt to any possible house you build around them or any social situation they find themselves in. And crucially, they can't be so smart that the player can just sit back and do nothing. So how do you make a video game AI that can do all of that?
Super spannend, der
That's what I
Gedanke.
want to explore in this video. I'm going to break down the clever ways that Maxis designed autonomy in this 4-game franchise, though with a focus on the original game and, let's be honest, the best one, which is The Sims 3. It's not going to get too technical, but there is a metric buttload of resources in the description if you want to dive deeper. With that out of the way, I'm Mark Brown, this is Game Maker's Toolkit, and here's how The Sims think. Okay, decision-making in The Sims is all driven by a set of mental and physical needs, dubbed motives by Maxis. In The Sims 1, that's hunger, hygiene, fun, energy, bladder, social, comfort, and room, or tidiness. They all go from -100 to +100, and if you combine them all, you get The Sims' overall level of happiness. These meters are constantly ticking down, each decaying at slightly different rates and faster if the sim is performing a related action. The bladder meter drops more quickly when the sim is eating, for instance. Maxis carefully tuned all of these rates to hopefully match a normal human schedule, like needing 8 hours of sleep and 3 meals a day. So, if the player doesn't give the sim a command, it will decide what to do by itself, and that decision is driven by a desire to fulfill these motives. Now, you might assume that
Ist ja zumindest für mich auch realistisch zu verstehen, dass wenn der Sim sozusagen gewisse Motive hat, gewisse Dinge erfüllen muss, wie schlafen, essen, Spaß, etc. Ja, wenn er isst, zum Beispiel schneller auf Toilette muss, weil klar, kommt was rein, dass der Sim quasi immer guckt, dass er seine Bedürfnisse befriedigen kann. Wobei ich mittlerweile bei Sims 4 manchmal denke, also wirklich, ich finde, in Sims 4 hat es so diese unlogische Logik Extreme angenommen. Also ich habe letztens wirklich mal Sims gespielt, ohne Mods, ohne CC, ohne alles. Und was meine Sims manchmal angestellt haben, da haben die nicht ihre Bedürfnisse erfüllt. Also da weiß ich nicht, was in denen vor sich geht. Ob da irgendwie das Gehirn permanentes Error anzeigt, keine Ahnung.
Sim knows how to meet its own needs, that a toilet will solve bladder, that fridges and stoves solve hunger, and books, TV and pinball tables solve fun. But it doesn't work like that. It's actually the other way around. Instead, all of the objects in the Sim's house contain this data and will broadcast what they can offer. A bed will say, sleep on me to get 10 energy. A toilet offers +20 to bladder if you use it, or +5 to room if you clean it. And other Sims will offer themselves as a way to top up social points. Maxis calls these advertisements. So, whenever the sim decides what to do, it quickly makes a list of every object in the house and what they can offer. The sim can then take that advertised number and weigh it based on its current needs. It does this by applying a multiplier to the promised score based on the sim's current motive levels.
Ist
For
das
example,
cool?
if the sim is well rested, the bed's energy boosting score is damped down. But if the sim is knackered, then that same score is boosted dramatically. Now the sim can take the list of interactions and their weighted scores and rank them. At the top of the list is the interaction that will give the most benefit to the sim right now, and so the digital dude should do just that. This clever system was actually inspired by one of designer Will Wright's previous games.
Eigentlich total
Sim
genial.
Ant, a virtual ant colony where the critters would be tempted to move by a...
Das ist schon gut. Leute, wir vor allem, ich fühle mich gleich angesprochen, als wenn er uns Menschen erklärt, aber eigentlich genial, dass dieses System von einem Spiel mit einer virtuellen Ameisenkolonie entstanden ist. Oh.
attractive pheromones. It's basically the same idea, but instead of pheromones, it's TVs, fridges, pinball machines, and bathtubs.
Jetzt müsste man das alles mal umbenennen und optisch umändern, um es zu zeigen, wie es bei den Ameisen war. Dann ist wahrscheinlich die Badewanne, keine Ahnung, eine Pfütze oder so oder was auch immer. Allerdings sind Menschen keine Ameisen. Really?
However, people aren't ants, and so if this was implemented exactly as I just described, it would lead to weird behaviors that make Sims seem either robotic or irrational. So many careful tweaks are needed to make it work properly. For instance, not all needs are equal. If a Sim is both starving to death and utterly bored, they should probably eat a sandwich rather than binge.
Ja, das
But if
stimmt.
the fridge and TV
Ich bin am Verhungern, aber ich will auch Spaß haben. Ich glaube, dass ich lieber jetzt Spaß habe und verhungere dabei.
are both
Es wäre in Sims 4 schon logisch.
Ja.
offering the same reward, which should the Sim pick?
Ja, das, was ihn zum
more
Überleben
rational
bringt.
behavior can be achieved by defining unique curves for each motive. For hunger, we want a curve like this. Now, the fridge's score will be reduced to almost 0 when the Sim is full, but will be extremely high when the Sim is starving, making that more important than any other motive. Similar, smaller curves are used for other physiological needs like bladder, hygiene, and energy. However,
Grandios.
less important needs like fun, social, and comfort
And smiley.
actually increase as the Sim becomes more happy. This was inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which says humans will focus on cognitive and social
spannend.
tasks only when their more basic lizard brain needs are met. Plus, while peeing will satiate your bladder, you can never have too much fun. We can also weigh the scores based on other factors too. For instance, each Sim has its own personality based on their score in areas like niceness, neatness, and playfulness. So while a pinball machine and a bookcase might advertise the same boost to fun, a Sim will weigh this based on their level of playfulness. Therefore, a more serious Sim will choose to pick up a book. Plus, we can weigh the interaction based on its distance from the Sim, which will make nearby objects more tempting. Finally, some interactions can override everything, like a telephone call or a school bus, and other
stimmt.
interactions can be locked entirely, so certain objects won't advertise themselves to kids or adults or a visiting guest.
Wahnsinn.
All of these factors combined give us a much more useful score, which has been adjusted to the different needs, personality, and proximity.
Das ist halt echt cool. Also wirklich super intelligent, dass man ja auf der einen Seite sagt, okay, es gibt Lebensdinge, die wichtig sind, damit der Sim überlebt, aber es verändert sich auch alles nochmal extremst, je nachdem, welche Persönlichkeit der Sim hat und wonach er dann greift und wählt und sich was aussucht. Also das ist so faszinierend und beeindruckend und umso mehr zieht man, finde ich, seinen Hut, was da alles im Gamecode drinsteckt, was wir alle gar nicht verstehen oder blicken können, zumindest die meisten. Also ich spreche jetzt von mir.
Of the Sim, and it's from these scores that the Sim's next move is picked. But, perhaps most importantly of all, the Sim doesn't actually choose the
Ja,
option
das
every
stimmt.
time. Instead, the Sim picks one of the top scoring interactions at random.
Ja,
This stops the Sim from feeling robotic and overly predictable,
Okay.
and it also means they're not able to fulfill all of their needs perfectly, which, actually gives the player something to do. What I've just described is a special type of AI called utility AI, or needs-based AI. This is a
bedarfsbasierte
system where a
KI.
character has a predefined set of needs, then looks around at its current options and picks the one that will fulfill its needs best.
Okay.
The one with the most utility. And in The Sims, it means a little person can be dropped into any house and then will act in a lifelike manner, carefully attending to its hunger and energy when necessary, but socializing and having fun when not. Plus, by putting the information on the objects instead of the sim, it's really easy for Maxis to add hundreds of objects to the game or make endless expansion packs without touching the rest of the code. And so for these
Stimmt, weil sie müssen im Endeffekt nur neue Objekte rausbringen, die mit irgendwelchen Punkten versehen. Das kann man ja auch im Baumenü sehen, wie viel Energie, wie viel Komfort und so das bringt. Und das wird ja dann auf diesen Score draufgerechnet. Und der Sim kann dann anhand des Raums, wo er ist, und der Optik sagen, okay, das hat so und so viele Punkte, das hat so und so viele Punkte. Meine 3 wichtigsten Sachen sind gerade, keine Ahnung, schlafen, essen, pinkeln. Und dann wählt er halt random eins von denen aus. Also, wenn du einmal den Code geschrieben hast, ist es quasi gar nicht mehr schwer, irgendwas zu verändern, weil du halt nur noch sagen musst, okay, ich habe ein neues Objekt erstellt, ich gebe denen jetzt die und die Punkte und die Zahlen und pack's ins Spiel.
reasons, this basic system has been used in all 4 games in the franchise. But Maxis wanted to take things even further when making the ambitious 3rd game in the series. Okay, so in The Sims 1, we saw how each Sim's personality, like their neatness and playfulness, would impact their decision-making. This would make each Sim feel somewhat distinct. But for The Sims 3, this idea was expanded dramatically by swapping the personality meters with traits. Things like neat, neurotic, heavy sleeper, and commitment issues. With 5 trait slots and 60-odd traits in the base game alone, that's about 5 million possible Sims, effectively making every character unique.
Das stimmt.
Now, these traits have many impacts on the Sim, like how a clumsy Sim will trip themselves up while walking, and a slob will fart and burp while idle. Sims also get bonus moodlets for acting to their traits, and there are interactions that are exclusive to Sims with certain traits, like how a computer whiz can make cash through hacking.
Ja.
But these traits also impact on the Sims' decision-making. This time, however, instead of weighing the scores against the Sims' personality, The Sims 3 actually just adds more motives to the pile. So in the code, every Sim has their usual basic needs like hunger, energy, and bladder, but also more motives related to their traits. Therefore, a couch potato needs to sit on the sofa and watch TV, just like how they need to pee, eat, and sleep. And then, in the same way that a fridge advertises itself as a fix for hunger, objects can advertise themselves as a fix for the Sim's trait-related motives. For instance, interactions like scare a Sim, steal candy from a child, smash a dollhouse, and write a trolling comment on the computer are all advertised to Sims with the evil trait. This means that Sims are encouraged to enact their unique personalities autonomously, while also juggling their standard everyday needs. Now, this idea of adding additional motives to a Sim can also be used to simulate social situations. For instance, if a Sim enters a gym, they will temporarily be given the additional motive be in gym, which is satisfied by objects like a workout bench or treadmill. When they leave, the motive is removed. Back at home, a Sim will be motivated to act as a hospitable host for as long as they have guests around. Meanwhile, the guests will be motivated to act in a way that's socially acceptable. And in The Sims Medieval, a Sim is given work-related motives while they're on the clock and then loses them during breaks. However, these motives can also be affected by traits. For example, if a Sim sits down to have a picnic, then the Sim's friends and family are motivated to join them.
Können wir mal darüber reden, dass auch das wundervoll ist? Ich sehe da so viele wunderschöne Dinge in Sims 3, wo ich mir denke, wo sind sie in Sims 4? Wo sind sie?
While strangers are discouraged, but a Sim with the inappropriate trait will override this, and they will, in fact, be motivated to sit with people they don't know, just to make them feel uncomfortable.
Nur damit
All of
sie
this means that Sims will act naturally and believably in whatever location they end up in, but with a few Sims standing out as acting unusually because of their unique personality. And this is all done by simply tweaking the Sims' motivations, rather than hand-scripting a bunch of specific rules and interactions. Though, that being said, sometimes you do need more hard-coded rules. take that house visit I mentioned. A visiting sim is indeed motivated to act in an appropriate way. But what happens if they stay too long, or if the player steps in and makes the sim act inappropriately? Well, to make this work, the house visit is overseen by a set of rules that dictate social norms. So if a sim sleeps in the host's bed or uses their computer, the rule set will instruct.
Das stimmt. Je nachdem, wie du dich verhältst, hat das Auswirkungen. Zum Beispiel in Sims 4 ja auch so, wenn du irgendjemanden besuchst und dann da anfängst zu kochen oder zu schlafen oder so, dann kommt ja auch, das dulden wir nicht und im schlimmsten Fall wirst du sogar rausgeschmissen. Also es gibt ganz unterschiedliche Auswirkungen.
The host to warn the sim and then kick them out if they go even further. Likewise, conversations need more hands-on authoring to reflect extremely specific pair-ups of people or super distinct social cues. For example, how should a sim respond to a joke if they are steaming mad at the joke teller, or if the other sim has said the same joke 5 times in a row? This is done through a series of rules, with an input, a set of conditions, and the output. So for that joke I just mentioned, if the listener has the good sense of humour trait, they will laugh. If their long-term relationship is sour, they'll be insulted. And if the sim repeatedly tells jokes, the listener will be bored. These so-called production rules are ranked in order of specificity as defined by the designer, and the top scoring outcome is used to pick the response. Maxis ended up writing thousands of handcrafted rules to determine the outcome of hundreds of possible conversation topics.
Ist der
But because the
Wahnsinn.
rules just go in a big stack and the most specific one is picked, they can't clash, break the game, cause an infinite loop, or lead to any other issue. Just like with the objects, designers can simply keep adding more and more to the pile. So far, I've been talking about individual sims, or small social situations like a conversation or a party. But what about simulating an entire town's worth of little people? You see, in The Sims 3, your house exists in an open-world neighbourhood with dozens of other sims, and features homes, restaurants, a park, and so on. Maxis needed to invent new tools to make all of this work.
Ja, das stimmt.
In truth, the neighbourhood actually operates in a similar way to the Sims themselves. That's because the town also has a bunch of motives and will make choices that will help it fulfill its needs. For instance, it ideally wants to maintain a 50-50 gender balance. So when a new sim is added to the neighbourhood, the probability of it being male or female is weighted by the current needs of the city. It also has a desired employment rate of about 80%, so it can force background sims to get hired or fired as seen fit. Basically, once a day at midnight, the town will check its own happiness level and then take a few actions in order to satisfy its needs. The
Wahnsinn.
individual lots have motives too. For instance, the restaurant may wish to have roughly 8 people eating outside during lunch and dinner hours. To achieve this, the lot will temporarily give the eat outside motive to a bunch of sims to tempt them to come to the restaurant. It can even narrow the focus.
Eigentlich echt gruselig und krass, wenn man mal drüber nachdenkt, wie einfach alles in diesem Code drin ist und alle Punkte erfüllt werden müssen. Also, ne, dieses Gleichgewicht, wie viele Sims in deiner Welt sind, wie viele arbeiten, wie viele Sims in diesem Restaurant zu sein haben und dann dieses Bedürfnis oder dieses Motiv kriegen. Wenn man richtig, richtig schlau ist. Ich meine, gut, wir können durch den MC ja schon sehr viel jetzt einstellen, aber wenn man es richtig gut kann, könnte man sogar in diesen Code reingehen und das alles umschreiben. Und das ist super faszinierend.
With certain traits like culinary and discourage those with other traits like frugal. Now, these sims that appear at the restaurant seem like fully autonomous characters. They have needs, they have families, they may even have had a baby and changed job since you last saw them. So are they actually living out their own simulated lives just off camera? Well, not quite. The background sims are actually simulated at a very low level of detail. Each day, the system looks at each sim and scores possible big life changes that could happen to them, like getting a job, falling in love with someone, or getting married. These are, of course, weighted using things like traits, existing relationships, and career paths. Also, the designers created charts for what a sim's needs will likely look like throughout the day. If it's just after lunch, for instance, they're probably not going to be very hungry. And so
Voll genial, ne? Ab der Uhrzeit, nee, nicht mehr so hungrig. Ab der Uhrzeit sehr hungrig, weil 3 Mahlzeiten, 8 Stunden Schlaf, diese typischen, gängigen Sachen. Es ist natürlich auch klar, dass Sims, die im Hintergrund rumlaufen oder die in Restaurants sind, nicht so intensiv dargestellt und gefördert werden, weil sonst wird das Spiel ja, also sonst brauchst du ja ein High-End-PC. Das wird ja nicht laufen.
when a background sim is promoted into being a foreground sim because they're in proximity to the player, the system checks the time of day and snaps all of their motives to the chart. Clever stuff. So, we've got tools to simulate characters, conversations, house visits, restaurants, and entire towns. And when you have such clever tech, it's tempting to simulate, well, everything. Take, for instance, the urinal rule. If you pee standing up, you know the deal. When picking a place to take a leak, you should always try to maintain a 1 urinal buffer from other people. It's like an unwritten social rule. So, Maxis added this rule to the game as well. But then, before the game launched, they took it out. That's because when the sim followed that rule, it was just kind of predictable and dull. But if sims picked toilets at random, it would often lead to funny and memorable moments of sims acting awkwardly. You see, while The Sims might have started life as a rather nerdy simulation game, essentially SimCity, but at a much smaller scale, it quickly grew into something very different. In playtests for the original game, Will Wright was surprised that players would tell elaborate stories about their sim families, embellishing details, reading into their decisions, and playing up random moments. It was fascinating to me how readily people would build a story around this, Wright says. To support this, Maxis added a last-minute feature to the game, the ability to take a screenshot, write a caption, and create a simple comic book, which could be uploaded to EA's website with a click. The feature was extremely popular, proving that for many people, The Sims was an avenue for storytelling. And that's still true today. Just search YouTube for The Sims to see what I mean. But supporting storytelling is a delicate balance. The game needs to be specific enough to create stories, but not so specific that there's no room for the player's imagination. So the final piece of this AI puzzle is knowing when to hold back, knowing what not to simulate, knowing when to make urinal choice random rather than scripted. One way to do this is to carefully employ ambiguity. Basically, to leave some things unsaid so players can make assumptions and project their own headcanon on the events on screen. A good example of this is The Sims' iconic babbling dialect known as Simlish. In early design documents, we can see that Maxis experimented with having the Sims speak real-world languages like English, Navajo, Estonian, and Ukrainian. But due to technical and logistical reasons, they ended up hiring 2 improv
ich finde das gut.
to just make up.
Ich muss ehrlich sagen, ich finde das gut, dass es keine richtige Sprache ist, sondern dass es wirklich eine ausgedachte Sprache ist, weil, weiß ich nicht, ich glaube, das würde sehr, sehr, sehr schnell langweilig werden, weil du müsstest ja so viele Textbausteine einbauen, das ist ja unmöglich.
Absolute nonsense.
Droba, 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 seeke nieba,
But this actually works wonders. When the Sims babble gobbledygook at each other, the player can assume, fill in the gaps, project that.
Vor allem, du kannst Vermutungen anstellen, aber auch sehr oft, wenn du dann diese Sprechblasen dabei hast, wie oft ich das hatte, dass zum Beispiel gerade frisch bei einem Date über ein Puppenhaus geredet wurde oder Grillkäse aufgetaucht ist. Also du bist manchmal in Situationen, wo du so denkst, boah, das hier ist gerade die voll tiefe Geschichte. Und dann guckst du so hin und denkst dir, ja, sie unterhalten sich gerade über Grillkäse.
Own imagination on The Sims and make the game their own. If we used actual language, the game would flatten and shrink, and everyone would be having the same experience, says EA's Matt Brown. No relation. Ambiguity can also make Sims feel smarter than they actually are, and hide cases where the simulation is doing something wrong. Another avenue is to always follow the player's lead and never use autonomy to go against the story the player is trying to tell. That's why Sims will use free will to relieve their bladder and fill their stomach, but won't autonomously quit their job or try romancing a random Sim. Just like with the Nemesis system in Shadow of War, Maxis took inspiration from the concept yes and from improvisational comedy. So the Sims try to build on the player's actions and try not to negate them. For instance, if a player makes two Sims fall in love, the autonomous system shouldn't make them break up again.
Ja.
Likewise,
Wobei das auch
user-created
spannend
Sims
wäre.
enter the world with no sexual preference. But if you instruct a male Sim to, say, flirt with other dudes, you're suggesting that he should be bi or gay, and the game will run with that. The game should always try to maintain the consistency of the player's story. So The Sims has a fascinating AI system, which allows for realistic human simulations and creative player-led storytelling. And most of it is driven by a very simple concept. Characters, locations, and entire neighborhoods are given a bunch of needs, and then try to make choices that will best fulfill those needs. With a little clever tuning, this leads to characters who feel believable, social situations where Sims act appropriately, and entire neighborhoods that stay consistent and balanced. But this is not just useful for running quirky, goal-free life simulations, and we can see utility AI being used in other types of games too. For instance, in XCOM, an enemy unit will consider every tile it can move to and score them based on factors like distance, flanking opportunities, angle, cover bonus, visibility, and proximity, before moving to the tile with the best score. It can also be used in procedural generation to build worlds that fit predetermined requirements. Utility AI is a fantastic addition to a game maker's toolkit, and its implementation in The Sims should serve as wonderful inspiration to game designers. And now, just to melt your brain, here's Katy Perry singing in Simlish.
Ein grandioses Video, Leute. Also ich hätte mir am Ende nochmal gewünscht, dass nochmal mehr auf Sims 4 eingegangen wird, wie da gehandelt wird, weil er sagte ja, in Sims 3 hat sich das alles sehr krass verändert mit der KI und AI und so weiter. Und dann frage ich mich, wie ist es in Sims 4? Sind sie da wieder ein bisschen zurückgerudert? Haben sie dann nochmal Dinge verändert, nochmal Dinge verbessert? Das habe ich jetzt so persönlich nicht so wahrgenommen. Er sagte ja auch, dass es sehr, sehr schwer ist, intensiver auf das Thema einzugehen, weil es halt schon sehr tiefgründig und technisch versiert ist und man natürlich gucken muss, wie man einem Laien, mir zum Beispiel, das so erklärt, dass er es versteht. Aber ich finde, er hat es sehr gut erklärt. Ich habe eine Menge gelernt. Ich habe Utility AI behalten oder KI und finde das super interessant zu sehen, dass wenn man einmal sowas entwickelt hat, wie es in anderen Spielen verwendet wird. Und ich finde es immer schön, mal hinter die Kulissen zu gucken, weil das erstens natürlich deinen Horizont erweitert und zweitens einem auch noch mal mehr Demut gibt, wenn man mal wieder sich beschwert, weil irgendwas nicht funktioniert oder die Sims logische Unlogik stattfindet, zu sagen, da ist ein riesengroßes, geniales System hinter, wo ich wirklich sagen kann, Dankeschön für so eine grandiose Arbeit und für so viele lustige, romantische und kreative Momente in die Sims. Falls du Lust hast auf noch mehr lustige und kreative Momente, dann schau doch mal da vorbei. Oder guck, was YouTube dir anbietet. Du möchtest, dass wir zusammen weiter wachsen? Dann lass doch gerne ein Däumchen nach oben da und ein kleines und kostenloses Abo. Das würde mich sehr freuen.